question about the future of the EU, you were saying that Ukraine will join the European Union. It's definitely one of the points in the 20 points. And there is talk of setting a date in the very near future by which Ukraine will join. But there is this paradox. On the one hand, from a security perspective, it's totally necessary and clear. It's an existential issue to integrate Ukraine into the European Union. But from a political perspective, it's extraordinarily difficult to envisage how it can join in the way that other countries joined. How do you've, unlike any other European leader, you've written extensively in the academic realm on differentiated integration and thinking about the EU in a much more complicated way. How do you square those two circles?
Yeah, I guess that's a little bit nerdy. So I did my PhD on flexible integration. So the concept and idea that not everyone needs to do everything at the same time, and a concept which we've seen throughout the
which everyone
history.
Apart from Finland seems to be using.
Exactly. We're in the core of Europe all the time. So it's concepts such as multi-speed and variable geometry and etc. So my big thinking here is that there's nothing that unifies Europe more than pressure, and now that pressure is coming from both the East and the West. And this means that European Union enlargement has become strategic and existential rather than legalistic and juridical. So we're going to start seeing a more flexible Europe. For instance, I now don't differentiate, even though I'm a member of the European Union, with the work that I do with the United Kingdom and Prime Minister Starmer, or especially the 10 conversations I have with the Prime Minister of Norway every week, or the work that we do with Iceland, even though they're not members of the EU. So then you come to the question of, okay, how do you integrate it into the system? And I think that, and I hear, just for everyone who, in the Finnish constitution, President does foreign policy and Commander-in-Chief, Prime Minister does the EU. So I don't want to step on the toes of the Prime Minister here, so I'm not going to give you any dates. But I think what's going to happen is that the Union is going to start looking at enlargement from a different perspective. It's probably going to turn the whole concept of enlargement around. So instead of you negotiating 35 chapters and 100,000 pages of acquis communautaire, you are granted membership, and then you start getting the rights of that membership as you close these chapters. And I think that could be a way out for Ukraine. I'm not saying it's going to be easy because, Ukraine has, over 40,000 inhabitants. The agriculture market is bigger than all of Europe combined. But at the same time, it has 800,000 men and women in the military. So I think when Ukraine joins the European Union, the military power of the European Union is basically going to double or triple overnight. So it has a lot of issues, but then there are going to be issues about countries organizing a referendum about enlargement and things like that. So it's not going to be, enlargement is always, it's about three things. It's about absorption on three things. One is the institutions, can they absorb? Two is budget, can it be absorbed? And three is policies, can it be absorbed? But I think it would be a travesty and strategic geopolitical mistake if Ukraine were not members of the European Union.
And what do you think the implications will be for other countries outside the EU, like the UK, Norway?
Well, as I've said, Mark, about the UK, is that it took you 7 years to negotiate yourself out of the EU. It'll take you 7 years to regret it, and then 7 years to negotiate yourselves back in.
Okay, we've got time for a couple of questions before we end. If people could make them short and introduce themselves first. Sorry?
Comfort.
Oh, Comfort, yes.
If Comfort is in the room. No, Comfort is in the room. Comfort does the first question.
Thank you very much, President Stubb and Mark. I think the other lesson I would add to your list, President, is that it does matter to have somebody from one of the Western countries to put very clearly on the table, like you have done, and you've brought Mark Carney to do that with you, to recognise the rupture. Yeah. Because without that, then the rest of the world and what the rest of the world has been saying doesn't land until one of you accompany that message. Mark asked you what that looked like in practice, and you referred to a more dignified foreign policy. But can I push a little bit further? Within the context of Sudan and Myanmar and Haiti, what does that actually look like in practical terms as well? And I don't want to look back in history, but I think a number of the rest of the world were very concerned about the variations of silence over Venezuela, and you've just underlined principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity as well. The challenge was that not everybody also supports Maduro. That's the challenge, but nonetheless, the principle still holds. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, no, it's a super good question, and thank you for all the reports that you and your team write in the crisis group. I try to read as many of them as I possibly can. I think the three examples that you brought forward, Sudan, Myanmar, and Haiti, are examples of what happens when we are focused on other crises, whether it's on Venezuela, whether it's on Ukraine, whether it's on Greenland, whether it's on Iran, or whether it's on Gaza. And I try to, and I raise it in the book, not only in the part where I talk about the global south, I mean, how can we not talk about Sudan, which is basically probably the most atrocious conflict that we have. Myanmar, completely forgotten. And we're talking about a country of, what, 55 million people, where over half are now living in poverty, and there's no such thing as human rights, fundamental rights being there. And Haiti, same thing. I personally find that I try to deal with as many conflicts as I possibly can, but in my mind, in foreign policy, there are things that I can say which will be based on my values, and then there are things and conflicts where I can do, like, for instance, on Ukraine. So I try to, pick my battles. But there's a legitimate claim on that. On Venezuela, complicated, because on one hand there's the element of breaking international law. I mean, you just can't go in and remove a leader. On the other hand, you're going, well, removing Maduro, is he a legitimate leader? So it's extremely complicated. I have to admit that in this particular case, I think values-based realism was a wonderful tool.
Have we got time for one or two more? Okay,
thank you very much. I'm Xu, the journalist from China's Taipei Media. And I would like to ask a question about your envision about the
book needs to be translated into Chinese.
Yeah, but I want to focus on the European political atmosphere ahead. Because for the drama that you've mentioned for the past 21 days, it should be like a wake-up call for European and the so-called European strategic autonomy. But would you worry that in the years ahead, maybe the rising populism or the isolationist emotion across Europe might taking part or might take apart the foundation for either European unity or the foundation for calling for further integration and strategic autonomy in Europe? And another follow-up question is
I think we're almost out of time. Do you want to answer that quickly?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'll give it telegraphically. I do think that the pressure that we are now seeing coming from the United States and also coming from Russia will actually lead to deeper integration. Probably more strategic autonomy, or whatever you want to call it, and however you want to define it, and also to an enlarged Europe. But there's another thing that it will lead to, and that is Europe looking also elsewhere. So we're kind of hedging or de-risking a little bit, like Mark Carney said in his speech. Canada is 70% dependent on trade with the US. We are not in that situation. But we used to talk about de-risking from China. I don't hear that too much anymore, if you know what I'm saying. We're talking about de-risking elsewhere, which is an interesting phenomenon in all of this. And I think, Europe is doing the right geopolitical thing, a deal with Mercosur. I won't have issue with what the European Parliament decided on that yesterday, but nevertheless, moving on. Or a free trade agreement with India. So you're going to start seeing Europe and other players. So this is, in very many ways, I believe it is Europe's moment. And you are going to start seeing that. And I think we can cope with it fairly well. And just one final point. Europe used to be considered to be slow and legislative and bureaucratic and regulatory. Way too stable. And right now, people are looking for stability. So I actually think that a lot of investment will start coming into Europe as well, I mean, I'm talking about the EU-US thing. So I'm actually quite optimistic about the future of Europe because of COVID, because of Ukraine, because of energy, because of the US.
Okay, so we got one final question, this gentleman here.
Good afternoon and namaskar. I'm Ishan Pratap Singh from the Global Shapers New Delhi Hub. I'm a 22-year-old who studied economics, entrepreneurship and international relations. My question to you is, could you tell me, to the point you mentioned, to your mind, in navigating diplomacy, what is the utility of, because you said it's better if you call again and if you do it in private. So what's the utility of doing anything in public, and how has it been for you navigating it, and how have you been able to develop the skills to navigate this so well when it's a complicated environment to do so?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, just to frame it, I think in foreign policy you have values, interests and power. And smaller players like myself, we have values and interests, but power becomes influence. And that's where diplomacy comes in. And I think we look at diplomacy, and we should look at diplomacy based on two pillars. One pillar is your traditional state-to-state relations. You know, what is the relationship between Finland and India? You know, values, interests, power, geography, history, culture. So that's one part, state-to-state, very formal. The other part is personal. What kind of relationship do I have with the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of India? And then I, as a president, have to make the judgment, what are the things I want to say out in the public and what are the things that I can deal with in private? For me, this is almost like a family matter or friend matter. It's a question of trust. I mean, some things you just can't say out in the public, but you can, if you have a good relationship, then you can say them directly. And for me, that's not appeasement. Quite the contrary. It's respect, or it's using dignified foreign policy. And then sometimes we use the public arena for diplomacy, and it is an extremely important tool in foreign policy. As we can see, I mean, look, the President of the United States uses his Truth Social as one of the most powerful foreign policy instruments that we have ever seen before. So I'm not denying that, but it doesn't all happen in the public sphere. It can happen in the private one as well. So if I was a student now, I'd be looking at the sort of juncture of these two. Super interesting.
Great. Well, that's all we got time for today. I'm sorry that we couldn't answer all the questions, but